All right, in 5, 4, 3. All right, welcome to the third, would that be the second, Global Talent Accelerator Diversity Series. And we're so excited today to have Shane Wallace from Calgary's very own CultureSmith joining us today to share his opinions, his mastery on this subject with us all and any of you watching. So Shane, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company you are with at the moment?
Yeah. So I say my name's Shane Wallace. I'm the founder and CEO of CultureSmith. So as the name sort of conveys, we help organizations smith cultures, build cultures. So CultureSmith, the name itself actually came out of an argument I was having with my business partner back in the day when we were pivoting from being a recruiting firm into more of a holistic employee engagement and corporate culture consulting practice. We were arguing over whether or not we wanted to be executive coaches or recruiters, and I didn't want to be either. And I just sort of blurted out, I want to be a CultureSmith. And he's like, well, what the hell is a CultureSmith? I was like, well, if a blacksmith can take an ugly hunk of metal and heat it up and pound on it and turn it into something beautiful and useful, why can't we do that with companies?
Yeah.
And so that's essentially what we do. We focus on everything from recruiting to executive coaching to workplace emotional intelligence, anything and everything to create the type of corporate culture that allows for innovation and growth and helps basically keep the enemies outside the gates for our customers.
I personally love that analogy. Like as soon as I saw the name CultureSmith, I understood that analogy, that reference. And obviously I give a shout out to your last name being Wallace, our Scottish heritage.
Yes.
You know, that was an important part of our history, definitely having those men that could create those shapes into what was necessary at the time.
I have a brother named William Wallace.
You don't?
I do indeed.
Don't.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
That is fantastic. That's a good name to have. That's a very good name to have. Okay, Shane, I'm going to throw you right to the wolves here. So first question, here we go. So we're seeing a lot of conversation right now in the world that the hiring system, the traditional hiring system that's been in use for who knows how long is sort of broken because big decisions for talented companies is still being based on a piece of paper, a resume. In your opinion, do you think it's time that the resume system for like applications to a job is examined or scrapped? Do you think the resume is still the way to go, or should we be doing it differently?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And so we don't put a tremendous amount of weight or stock into resumes. I don't believe that they should be eliminated. I believe that where they are in the recruitment process is flawed.
Okay.
So we actually produced a book about 6 weeks ago called Hire EQ, and we referenced one of the statistics in there that showed that the average hiring manager rules a candidate out for employment within 11 seconds of reading their resume. And so if we have the resume at the front of the process, which we do right now, we are arbitrarily eliminating talent, which is going to erode the value of cultures based on an arbitrary decision by a very stressed out, busy line manager, that the only reason the resume is put at the front of the process is not to hire the best person. It's to expedite this super stressed out hiring manager who isn't treating hiring as a core function because they already have a day job. This is just an additional task that's been dumped on their plate.
Yeah.
Where we feel the resume adds value is in the actual interview, to use it as a set of guardrails to structure a conversation in order to compare and contrast previous experiences with what the organization is looking for from a technical standpoint. A resume is a great conversation starter. Mm-hmm. We're just not even getting to the conversation because the resume is ruling people out.
Because 11 seconds. That's all you got.
11 seconds.
In that book you produced, and I'll probably, for anything you reference like this, I'll put a link. You send me a link and we can put that into LinkedIn so people can find this material. But has that significantly been shortening given what's happening to human beings staring at phones, swiping left, swiping right to choose potential mates? Everybody's got to have, it's not even an elevator pitch anymore. It's like it's an even shortened version, and that's on every level, personal, professional. Is that shortening, do you think?
Well, yeah, and especially with the amount of AI that is being driven into HRIS and talent management platforms that are literally collating resumes based strictly on keywords. So now it's not even a person taking 11 seconds to eliminate somebody. It's a piece of software taking nanoseconds to eliminate somebody. And the byproduct of that, what we're seeing from the candidate side, is just the tremendous amount of anxiety that goes into somebody when they need to craft a resume.
Exactly.
Because when you think of the pressure that an entrepreneur puts into their elevator pitch, and this person is looking to try and generate a new job,
Yeah.
and it's how do I encapsulate an entire career and all of my value into a single piece of paper that is going to be ruled out by an algorithm.
Oh my God. So that scares me to no end. I'm, it's a side conversation, but I'm on the Elon Musk team that the future of artificial intelligence does scare me a little bit. You know, the way we're going. Yeah. I use a drone that can follow my skateboard. Like, we're just making it so easy on a day-to-day basis to let these things. That's a side conversation. That's definitely. But there must be cheats then. If that's the truth, if there's algorithms and AI is being used to measure keywords, there must be plenty of tools out there for people to polish a resume if that's still, as we know, the best foot in the door.
Well, yeah, and honestly, it's interesting to bring that up, because we see that, I'm going to get a little bit critical here, but we see a lot of the sort of career counseling and outplacement services that are available to candidates, especially in Calgary right now in a challenging market. We have a hard time viewing them as anything other than a little bit predatory, because they're selling the value proposition that, hey, because so much emphasis is put on the resume, we'll help you write the perfect resume and you're just going to take care of everything. And it may be true. They may actually help them get a job by actually crafting a better resume. But they have no idea if the job's going to fit them. They have no idea what the culture is. They have no idea the emotional toll that it's going to take if this person ultimately lands in the wrong position, because there's been no focus on culture or engagement or emotional intelligence. And now so many applicants that we meet feel trapped because one of the things that the algorithm looks for is job movement. And so if I've had too many jumps in my career, I'm being arbitrarily ruled out. So now, you know what? I actually have to, in order to maintain the equity of my resume, I have to stick in this job for the next 2 to 3 years and be miserable so that I don't damage my future career prospects by having a blemish on this arbitrary piece of paper that is judging so much of my worth.
So in short, almost in an effort to make sure that our resumes are better suited to that algorithm process, we are in turn making ourselves that same algorithm without looking into the other parts of a company, what the right fit's going to be, all those different things that CultureSmith does. All those, that varying degree of what a company can be, that position should be and could be for you. We are trying to make ourselves robotic on paper, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it permeates into all aspects of our life, because let's say that somebody is successful in being able to tolerate the next 3 years of their life in a toxic culture that they shouldn't be in the first place. I guarantee you they're bringing that home. I guarantee you they just missed out on 3 years of their kids' lives, and they missed out on, like,
you're not walking in like, hey, honey, how was your day? Mine was superb. Kids, come give dad or mom a hug. You're not really, Of course. I never thought about that, like sort of that bleach over, that carrying over. Yeah, that's a huge point. I mean, we're talking about 40 hours a week minimum for most people. And that's a huge chunk of your life. And if you're not happy there, you're definitely not happy at home. You just want to get, that's horrific.
Yeah.
Okay, this question, I'm going to move on because I think this is the question that Tiona and I are going to be most excited for the answer. So we tagged you in that clip, the first big panel we did, and Dr. Lino, which I lovingly refer to him now as, he had made a point that he didn't believe that curiosity had any place at work. In a professional capacity, curiosity for your coworkers who might come from a different cultural background, who might come from any varying degree of different background. He didn't feel it was a safe place to do that at work, to ask those questions, even if your heart is on your sleeve when you do so. Now, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, you know what? I believe I see where he's coming from, and I would support a lot of what he's saying. The challenge that I have is anytime we will universally say that something does or does not belong within our society, within our corporations, I get a little bit guarded for that.
Yeah.
I don't see how we are going to live and work in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world without curiosity.
Sure.
So if we condition people to set aside curiosity, I don't see that ending well for us.
Yeah.
Now, where I agree with him is in understanding when and how to act on that curiosity.
Mhm.
So if you are infringing on somebody else's benefits, if somebody else, like, so the point that he made in that clip where he's talking about, if you want to, if I'm, my demographic, a middle-aged white male, and I want to actually embrace allyship with females in my workplace, to go and actually, through curiosity, ask them about their experience with harassment. And yes, that's not appropriate. They haven't given permission for that conversation to happen.
No.
And so if I'm using curiosity as well, hey, I'm just trying to be curious about this, I'm trying to be a part of this, I can see where that could be a very slippery slope.
Of course.
I just don't believe that we can say, call it curiosity, time of death, August 19th.
Yeah. No.
We've moved on.
And I think that extends to a lot of different things. And I think cancel culture, which is something I want to ask you about in a second as well, has really started to draw these lines in the sand across all aspects of life. You know what I mean? Like, the freedom of speech versus what you're free to say these days. You say one thing that maybe you said from your heart, or maybe you said it from a malicious place, but should we still have the right to say those things without being completely canceled across the board? I think it's now more than ever, there's a definite fear of curiosity because of the repercussions that we're seeing all over. And I'm not a big, I don't follow the celebrity news and stuff, but even saying that, you can't avoid seeing which celebrity is just thrown out of Hollywood, who's being dropped by their agents because of what they've done. Some I totally agree with, but there's also sort of a thing happening in the world right now where the judge and jury is, the armchair surfer, whatever you call those people, the people sitting at home that are commenting, the judge and jury is at, the power of the internet. So do you think the cancel culture is stressing these things to a point where people are afraid to, have that open conversation with a coworker as well?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing that. We're seeing a lot of leaders that we're coaching right now struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it, and I have a certain amount of compassion for them, in that many of these individuals built businesses, successful businesses, in previous eras.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you think about, if I lost my cool as a leader in the early 80s, and I said something inappropriate in a moment of anger, there was limited consequence to that. I'm not justifying the behavior. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying there was limited consequence.
Yeah.
Because our employees were anchored to our business. The process of going out and getting a new job was manual and was risky.
Yeah.
Right? Where now it's highly covert and highly automated. I don't like what you say to me as my leader. I can update my LinkedIn profile within 30 seconds.
Exactly.
I can throw an anonymous Glassdoor review about my company saying what a horrible place it is to work. Like, the consequences are real and they're instant.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do see a lot of leaders that are struggling to see where they fit within this new era of leadership. How is it that, because all of the tricks that they've used to build these successful businesses don't work anymore.
Yeah.
And so they're going through their own identity crises, where it's like, I've never dealt with this before, and I don't know how.
And so how do you, I know this is going to be a ridiculously hard to crack down question, but maybe let me rephrase it as I'm thinking about it. So if you could elevator pitch what makes a good leader of a big, diverse organization, who would he or she be? Like what do they encapsulate as a good leader in 2020, with everything you've just mentioned, how easy it is for someone to just instantly post anonymous negative feedback that could or could not be true. So, if you could give that person the pitch, this is what you're aiming for as the leader of an organization.
So I'll answer that in two ways. First of all, from a strictly technical standpoint, the model that we've developed and we promote is a hybrid of what would be known as servant leadership and transformational leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So we are wholesale believers in servant leadership, which simply put is the job of the follower is to meet the needs of the organization, and the job of the leader is to meet the needs of the follower. so that in turn the follower can meet the needs of the organization. Now,
well, like Donald Trump would be a really good example then.
Yes, he is the poster child for the opposite of what we believe.
Exactly.
So it's a situation. Now, in order for that to happen, the needs of the organization need to be known.
Yeah.
You need to have a clear standard, a clear purpose. There needs to be some sort of cause behind what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the business itself, where it works the best is when the business itself is merely the vehicle to promote a bigger cause or agenda.
Sure.
And if I can see that as an employee, setting aside my insecurities, setting aside my my fear about speaking truth to power and offering ideas and being criticized, I can park all of that because this cause failing to come into fruition is more painful to me than the temporary little bout of anxiety I have about raising my hand and saying, well, what about this idea?
Of course.
So if we have that, that's going to create, every follower is going to have a certain, what we call a certain level of mastery versus motivation to execute on these needs.
Okay.
And depending on how much mastery and motivation they have, the leader is going to need to give a certain amount of direction and support. Well, the leader is going to have a certain level of mastery or motivation in terms of the amount of direction or support that they need to give.
Of course.
And that's where they need to build a tribe around themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So leadership by tribe is what we believe needs to happen. And that does not mean that we need consensus and groupthink and slow an organization down from making key decisions. What that means is a leader needs to be self-aware enough to know where they need support and where they require direction.
Yeah.
And they need to build a support network around themselves, go to people in those areas, so that when their follower has a need, they're able to meet that need right away, regardless of whether or not that leader has that skill.
Specific skill. Yeah.
Right. And so if leaders that embrace that are able to navigate this, because it breeds authenticity, the followers are having their needs met. And this is where I don't want to say it's going to give them credit for making the odd comment that is a misstep. But what it does is it brings vulnerability and authenticity to where if a comment is made that is inappropriate, rather than running to Twitter and condemning my boss, I'm actually having a conversation with my boss saying, hey, that's actually off base and here's why.
Yeah.
Boss is now getting feedback because they've already shown a propensity to absorb that feedback and actually learn from it.
Which is, that's a huge point. That's what I think is the scariest thing about, to return to a cancel culture, is if it's just a blanket, like you said, almost with Dr. Lino's point, if it's just a line in the sand and there is no place for it, time of death, we lose the ability to grow as people. We lose the ability to learn from our mistakes, to learn from another person's perspective. And I like to think that, I grew up in Scotland, moved to Canada, and again, I'm a white guy, so that, I don't understand other people's causes, but I would like to know that, if I have a question for one of my friends, or not necessarily at work, it would all depend on the context. And Global Talent Accelerator is a very diverse team and everybody's very open with each other. But how am I going to learn? And he also had made a point to buy a book. Sure enough, get the right books, read up on it. But I do think I have a large amount of emotional intelligence compared to others. And I think that's how people with a high, EQ or EI, whatever it is, that's how we grow and learn. And that's how we become better people.
I couldn't agree more with you. I had gotten into a bit of a debate on LinkedIn, I think it was about a year ago now, about buying books on emotional intelligence and learning emotional intelligence by reading as opposed to practicing, and how it's a half measure.
Yeah.
And that, yes, it's great to get some theory. It's great to be armed. I think you need to be responsible and have a certain base level of knowledge before going into these situations. But I don't know, like, the fundamental problem that we see across companies, and I will say society in general, is we no longer have empathy. And so I don't know if it's because we don't understand what empathy actually is. I don't know, like, I've got suspicions on why we've lacked empathy. I believe that empathy is a very complex behavior. And we learn complex behaviors we're mimics.
Yeah.
And I don't see where empathy is being modeled. And if empathy is not being modeled, I can't learn it.
No.
And that's the problem. Like, you show me any aspect of business that actually works without understanding people.
It's true. That's true.
And so you don't grow empathy. You don't grow modeled behavior reading books and articles.
Mm-hmm. No. It's funny that you said empathy is so often misunderstood or is just disappearing. I said this, I was at a campfire. My buddies have a campfire next to the river here where I live in Calgary. And we were talking about something very similar to this. It's cool that you said that. And I said, I think that empathy and irony have so much in common. Everybody talks like they understand what it is, but I think both are so misunderstood these days. You know what I mean? Like I know 3 people that are like, oh, I'm an empath. And I'm like, are you? Like there's, I'm good if you are and you truly have found that out about yourself. But I think it's falling to
therein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem is that empathy is viewed as something you either have or don't have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Empathy is not a trait.
No.
Empathy is, so when we speak about empathy, we speak of it not in terms of amounts, like you need to get more empathy. We speak of it in terms of accessibility and application.
Wow.
Can you access empathy in the moment, and do you know how to apply it?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we use this 4 colors behavioral system within our program, and greens within this are often viewed as high empathy.
Okay.
Because they care deeply for others, where reds are viewed as the opposite. And most leaders project as heavy red. Many rank and file employees.
So many studies over the years have said that there's
Exactly.
sociopathic tendencies within that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's talk about empathy. So what's being misconstrued is the difference between empathy and compassion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Empathy is understanding, right? So, and if you look at empathy actually comes, so there's cognitive empathy. I could understand where what I've done might have bothered you.
Yeah.
There's affective empathy, which is I can actually get in touch with a time in my past where I felt the same way you're feeling right now. So there's some understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's compassionate empathy, which is your pain is my pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be the blanket definition of empathy.
Exactly.
And that if you are not wounded by this, you're not showing empathy. And that we fundamentally disagree with.
Yeah. Agreed. I wanted to say one last point before I'll move on to another question for you. You had said leader by tribe or something like that. And what popped into my head right away was almost the phrase when it comes to raising a baby, like it takes a village. Would you say that's a fair sort of assessment for a good leader? Is it understanding that it's going to take a village to build something big, in business terms, profitable, that's growing to scale? It takes a village to understand that it's not just you, it's a team that's going to make this thing successful. Is that a fair comparison?
I would absolutely think it's a fair comparison, just because it's in order for that child to develop fully,
mm-hmm.
you have to set aside the ego of a parent. You have to allow other factors to nurture. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting you bring it up. So we do a values-based exercise with our organizations to help them define their cultures.
Yeah.
And my wife and I ran it on our kids.
Oh, cool.
Where we figured out what our family values are, her and I, and the varying degrees of alignments that each of our 5 kids have with it. And we don't share the same values.
Yeah.
And I took that as a welcome sign that they are being influenced and they are being raised and they are forming their own value set of what the world is. There were elements of overlap. But what that tells me is when one of our disagreements in terms of behavior within the family is based on these values.
Yeah.
When we don't share values with somebody, we view each other on a scale of, Lee, I think you're wrong, to I think you're dangerous.
Okay.
And so if I'm pushing my value on you, I'm potentially just looking more and more dangerous to you, which means you're just going to act out more and more against me.
Of course.
And this is what I mean by empathy. So being able to understand that my kids don't have the same worldview that I do. and being okay with that, but then acknowledging, okay, however, there is a social contract here. And the values under which this household is constructed are affording you certain liberties right now that you need to pay for through a certain standard of behavior.
Sure.
I don't need you to tell me I'm right. I don't need you to tell me that this is the way you're going to live your life when you leave the house, but I need you to respect the social order.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing within a company. We don't need somebody to be universally aligned with the values, but what we need to know is where that misalignment is and have enough empathy to understand that pushing our core values down somebody's throat isn't always the best way. Like,
no,
it's a measure of compliance.
Sure. And it seems like it would foster resentment. And that's not going to be a healthy growth within your organization, be that the household or the business. Resentment is never going anywhere good.
Right. And so when my wife and I look at our kids, we're like, our job is to put productive members, to not build sociopaths, to put productive members out there into society. And I believe that the same thing is true for a company. Many companies are looking at their carbon footprint right now. I question my leaders. Are you looking at your emotional footprint?
Wow.
Are you looking at the impact that you are making on your employees' emotional intelligence on a daily basis, and the impact that that is having on their spouses, their kids, the barista they get their coffee from on the way home? What is the emotional footprint of your business?
And I'm a huge believer in, as cliche as it sounds, when I used to run my tours, we would play a game like Pass the Hug. That's obviously pre-COVID. And, a lot of cultures, it was very strange for them at first, but then they would be requesting, like, can we do this? It was just 27 people down each side of the bus. And just how quickly that, and I'm not suggesting people should be hugging each other at work, because that's a whole other conversation, but just the butterfly effect, you know what I mean? And I think that's what you're getting to, that if you're coming down and there's resentment being fostered at work, and then that person's a total dick to the barista, to maybe the C-train driver, doesn't stand up for someone who should be sitting down and getting home. But do you ever, I just wanted to ask, do you ever come across the sort of old school leaders, or maybe they don't reach out to you? Do you have an example of someone, when you talk about something like emotional footprint, they sort of scoff and they say, that's got no place in business. What hippy dippy crap is this? Do you encounter that?
Yeah, constantly. Especially in this city, to be honest, it's the toughest veneer for us to crack.
Okay.
Because I'll give you a prime example.
Perfect.
We will get called routinely saying, okay, you guys work on employee engagement and culture. I need you to come in and motivate my staff. They're not working hard enough. They need more motivation. And I will come in, we'll do some discovery, and I'll say, okay, here's the problem here's your staff's motivation problem. You as a leader lack empathy. Increase your empathy, you'll have more motivation. And the pushback we'll get is, look, I'm not going to be nice to people that aren't doing their job. That's not what I called you in for.
Chicken or the egg.
What they're asking me for is, do you not have a fat, juicy carrot in your bag and a very, very sharp, pointy stick so that I can dangle the carrot and I can poke them with the stick and I'm going to get a bunch of productivity? What people fail to realize is that lack of motivation is not a motivation issue. Procrastination has nothing to do with lack of motivation. It has to do with a lack of empathy.
Yeah.
If I'm procrastinating, I know the consequences of my procrastination. I know the consequences if I do not hit my boss's standard. They've been very clearly laid out to me, yet I'm still not hitting the standard.
Yeah.
Not because I'm not motivated. It's because I lack empathy for my future self.
Ah.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
And the reason I lack empathy for my future self is I've never seen empathy modeled.
Wow.
I don't know what empathy looks like. How am I supposed to care for my future self when every performance review I get points out every place I suck and where I need to stop sucking for the benefit of the organization?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So few of these performance plans are on self-development. And if we actually get a healthier, happier version of the person that we've hired, that they're going to create benefit for the organization. And so
Mm-hmm.
I say, if you can model empathy, then we can start teaching them how to display that empathy for their future self.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
that they can recognize, hey, you know what? That's going to suck when I don't hit my goals and I'm on the business end of a tough conversation with my boss.
Yeah.
I can actually be in touch with how painful that's going to be. And I respect future me enough that I don't want to put me through that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have an honest chat with current day version of me and say, you know what? You're going to turn Netflix off and you're actually going to get this report done.
Yeah. I love it. I love future self empathy. It reminds me of Jerry Seinfeld talking about night version and day version. Night version will always give up, lack of sleep for the potential of hooking up or having that extra party versus the next day. And future self empathy. I love that. I'd never heard of that before, but I think it's massively
well, and we don't,
important.
It's under attack because if I had a tough conversation with you, if I had to say something to you
mm-hmm.
that was going to hurt your feelings 20, 30 years ago,
yeah,
I had to say it to your face.
Yeah.
Which means I actually got to see your face. I got to see your reaction. I got to practice empathy because I got to actually experience it, where now I send a tweet.
Mm-hmm.
Now I send a text. I'm very brave behind my keyboard.
Of course.
And the problem with my bravery behind my keyboard is I haven't practiced any empathy. I haven't modeled any empathy. I don't see your reaction as you're reading the text. So I'm robbed of the learning opportunity to figure out, hey, there's got to be a better way. If I would just actually rephrase the wording there, I would not have hurt that person. They may actually be able to get me what I want. What I'm doing instead is giving myself the dopamine hit that I've taken action against somebody that has wronged me.
Ugh.
I've taken back power. And so if organizations can get their power balance in check, and this is why we're such big subscribers to servant leadership, is the command and control hierarchy does not work, yet we continue to replicate it. We actually threw a post on LinkedIn yesterday about have you ever heard of the Dvorak keyboard?
Nope.
Well, the Dvorak keyboard was invented in 1939, and it is, as opposed to the QWERTY keyboard that we use every single day, the Dvorak keyboard is faster, it's more accurate, it leads to less repetitive stress injuries. It is better in every conceivable way. But the reason we don't use it is because the keyboard we use right now was not designed for typing speed or accuracy. It was designed to keep the typewriter upon which it was invented from binding up. Is the arms needed to be spaced out so that they wouldn't connect with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've gotten rid of typewriters, but we've kept the keyboard due to muscle memory. If you remember when you learned how to type, you don't want to go back through hunting and pecking, trying to learn a new way to type on a new keyboard.
Exactly.
So even though it's better in every measurable way, muscle memory has us stick to an inferior product that actually creates harm.
Wow.
Even though these leaders are seeing better versions, they see servant leadership is better in every measurable way. They are sticking to command and control out of muscle memory because it's going to be awkward and painful for them to learn new skills.
Absolutely. And would you say, you mentioned dopamine there, and I can't remember how you phrased it, but just, the ability, we're losing that connection when we had to say something to someone's face, and I'm not a good bearer of bad news, but if it is bad news or if it's something that's going to be a prolific thing in their life, I do prefer to say it in person. I do, because I think then the conversation goes back and forth, and we're basically hairless apes. You know what I mean? We read. There's a reason we nod to each other, or we lift the side of our. I mean, this is me going anthropologist. We do that little when we pass a stranger. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of, hey, have a good day. I respect you as we pass each other. Do you think generationally some of these things are going to get worse because there's an entire?
Yes.
It's going to get worse unless we do something now.
Every rite of passage that you go through can be done digitally.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even have to go through the awkwardness of picking somebody up in a bar anymore. You just swipe left.
Ugh, I know. And you could be, the person could be in the same bar that you're actually looking at their profile, potentially,
And so what's happening is that is all coming crashing down.
Mm-hmm.
The second people join the ultimate meritocracy, which is the capitalist workforce.
Yeah.
So these leaders are frustrated, saying, I've got entitled, narcissistic, self-involved employees
that have the ability to threaten.
Entirely,
that have the ability to threaten as well. Like, you can't say anything to me because I will just.
For sure.
Yeah.
Where I look at it more like they're more like Neo in the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When Neo first gets unplugged and he's like, I can't move my arms. It's like, well, it's because you've never used them before. They've never used these muscles before. They've never had to have a tough conversation with somebody because they've always been able to tweak it. And it's, so yes, it will get bad because try taking away people's phones.
I know. It's interesting to see what's happening with TikTok right now, and that's the end of the world for a certain generation. Like, everything that's happening in, the US, to pick obviously where that's happening, the biggest uproars are going to potentially get rid of TikTok. Not my state numbers are out of control, the anti-vaxxers, the anti-mask people, it's TikTok. And that to me speaks volumes to an entire, I wouldn't say an entire generation, a percentage within that generation, but I would say a large amount of a generation.
You're taking away my dopamine.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's and I think there's enough information out there now that we know that it was strategic from the get-go with social media, that, big entities like Facebook were looking at, we're partnered up with Harvard and psychology and trying to get a way that people would get that fix. And I'm 41 and, I have some social media and I understand it because sometimes I get a comment on a picture I'm proud of and I feel it. I'm like, oh, cool. They like the picture too. And that's a scary thing when it's going to be a massive amount of someone's upbringing. I think that's something that really should be, and as you're saying, it's the spillover into the workplace. I had never really made that connection until we had this conversation. Okay, I'm going to throw another question at you.
Sure.
This will probably be our last, this will be our second last question because I'm going to wrap it up with a challenging question, I think. So what would you say with the companies you work with is the biggest mistake you see if and when they're hiring for culture fit?
Not defining their culture, not using a very loose, non-evidence-based, non-scientific approach to defining what culture is. Culture is not like, and so we'll ask, the beautiful thing about having the recruiting arm to our business is, we're going to meet 20, 30 candidates a week. And so we get to ask the question, what's your culture like? Well, it's good. Okay. So what makes it good? And if it's, oh, well, this is pre-COVID, we have a great flex time policy, or, we got a foosball table in the break room, or we've got Wacky Shirt Friday. Right. Well, and that's not culture. Those are perks. Like the definition of the word culture, if you actually look up the word culture, it is the system of attitudes and beliefs that separates one group of people from another. Separates.
It's weird.
Separates. Not bring together, separates. And so we argue that if you actually want diversity and inclusion within your workplace, you need to know what separates your workplace from the rest of workplaces. Because if that is what draws people in, that's what creates diversity and inclusion. Because we share a common set of values. We share a common belief. We are with this organization because of this culture. And because we share that connection, it's not as threatening for a diverse idea to be lobbed in. That's where you can start having compassionate curiosity and these conversations around it, because it's a welcoming, safe place. As opposed to culture being defined through what's in an employee handbook. And so that's the biggest mistake that we see them make, is they don't actually take the time and seek out the expertise to quantifiably define culture.
And I would agree. I would also say that I think culture, maybe not so much as irony or empathy, but it's an oft misunderstood word. Like it means. Culture's thrown out there like this is our culture, but I think you've put it quite eloquently there, with the description, the actual definition of it. I think it's probably something that people are using on a day-to-day basis, but they're not using it correctly.
Well, and we trip people up all the time because there's psychologically, there's 4 measures to a healthy culture. And that is that you have a predefined way of a response to critical feedback,
Mm-hmm.
the aptitude to provide critical feedback, a response to chaos, and a response to pressure. And that response is something that benefits the organization over the individual. That's how you define culture. And so when we ask people, how's your culture? Oh, we got a great culture. Okay, great. How many people have you given feedback to this week? Well, no one. I'm sorry, you don't have a great culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you're not.
And I get it.
So anyways.
Everything you're saying is coming full circle. And it's really given me a great impression as to what CultureSmith is, because that feedback in turn builds that sort of, it takes a village, that tribe of working together, which helps in turn learn empathy for your future self. And so I'm really starting to get a good picture and encapsulation of what CultureSmith does. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to phrase this question. Just thank you for that answer.
Okay.
Let's see. How am I going to phrase this? What is something you wish you could say to the world about how to hire a happy, functional, profitable, full of empathy, all the things that CultureSmith does? What is something you wish you could just hammer home to people? And you did mention it could be specifically to Calgary, because I think you pointed out that you find Calgary businesses, culture might be a little bit different. And I've only been in Alberta for 2.5 years from Vancouver, originally Scotland. And I'll make this point. Glasgow was known, and it's a rough city. It's known around the world to be a rough place, but also people are open. When I would, to this day, when I go back and visit, you get on a bus to go somewhere, maybe not in the days of COVID, but you say good morning to someone and they say good morning back. People are still, I don't know if it's from an older culture where people don't let the small things bother them, but I've noticed that Alberta seems to be a bit more standoffish, a bit more Calgary. I've never lived in Edmonton, but a bit more sort of old school, without putting it in a bad spin, a bit more traditional. I'm a man. This is how I operate. This is, emotions are for women. I've noticed that there's a little bit of that here. And was that the point you were sort of trying to make when you said Calgary specifically? You sometimes encounter these leaders who say, emotional intelligence, what's that got to do with business? Was that sort of what you were trying to get at?
It's part of it. Calgary is a really interesting sort of, there's a number of different factors, and part of it. So like I've been recruiting in Calgary since 98.
Okay.
And through the late 90s into the mid 2000s, we were a boom bust economy, boom bust city.
Mm-hmm.
And what went down always came back up. And so we became dismissive of things because we bought into the cycle. Mm-hmm. This is just the cycle. And it's not lost on me. So if you ask what I could get people to realize is how seductive believing in cycles is. Mm. Because when you believe in a cycle, you basically absolve yourself of any and all responsibility for your shitty behavior. Because these external forces rising tides are going to raise all boats again. So why would I invest in getting feedback, in learning some nasty things about myself for the benefit? And so it's the emotional cost. It's when organizations reach out to us, they reach out to us because, again, they have an issue in their culture. And it's really challenging when we start asking them to own that. Mm-hmm. That how narcissistic it is to believe that your employees stay awake every night thinking how they can ruin your life as a leader. Mm-hmm. And then systematizing it. So phenomenal book called Atomic Habits by a guy named James Clear. Mm-hmm. Highly recommend it. He's got a brilliant quote near the beginning of the book where he says, "We do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems." And so we have these aspirational aims and we see leaders speak from the pulpit on how we're going to change the world. And then they go and they squeeze interviews for this critical hire that they have in between meetings and lunch breaks. They show up 10 minutes late for the interview. They spend 11 seconds on the resume. They don't check references. They don't run psychometrics. They haven't defined their culture. every hiring decision you make, whether it turns out good or bad, the consequence of that decision is going to last for years. So why are we being so dismissive about the process?
Amazing.
Why are we not actually making the hire? I will argue it is the most broken business process. And it is a process. And if we treated hiring with the same level of passion and respect that the majority of the leaders I see spend on their pitch deck to get funding, we wouldn't have as many issues.
Amazing. Amazing. You know what, Shane, I think we're hitting, where are we hitting now? I think, almost an hour.
We've gone over.
No, that's good. But I knew this was going to happen with you because I've taken so many notes. When we briefly spoke last week with Tiona as well, I knew I was going to love this. Dude, thank you so much, basically, for helping Global Talent Accelerator put this new program out there, because you've said so many important things. Some give me hope for the future. Yeah. Some make me a little bit apprehensive and nervous about the future. But hey, the future is in our hands, and you know what? It starts right now, is what I always like to say. And when I sit and I get all hippy dippy with my my friends at the campfire, and they're talking about things in the past and what they wish they could change, I always just point at the river, and I'm like, time is like that river right there. You can only fix it starting now. You can only make what's broken repaired starting right now. And I think you said a lot of huge things about, old school leadership, things coming into today's day and age about how to better hire to fix or to grow your organization in a better way. And I think, the whole discussion we just had about empathy and the common misunderstanding of what it actually is. So Shane, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.